Happy day, friends. When you were created with an inner knowing. Okay? When you were created, let's just say there was this little jewel or this little gem that was placed within you. And this gem that was placed within you represents your inner knowing. It represents wisdom, it represents truth. It represents infinite intelligence, okay? You were born with this inner knowing. You were born with access to this inner knowing. And at this point in time, you're being called, you're being invited to charge up this inner knowing. Okay. You know, whenever you have your cell phone and it tells you that your phone is down to 10% and then it tells you that your phone is down to 5%, it's giving you a warning, right? Those are warning signs to let you know that it's time for you to plug your phone in and charge it up. And that's what is coming through right now, is that there's this invitation for you to charge up your inner knowing. Okay. And so you may be asking, how do I do that? How do I go about doing that? And in order to charge up your inner knowing, there are things that you have to do. There are things that you have to do that will contribute to your inner knowing being charged up, right? Another way to say it, we're saying charging up your inner knowing. Another way to say it would be for you to build up confidence within yourself, to build up confidence, to strengthen this access that you have to, or this connection, we'll say, to strengthen. Another way to say it would be that instead of charging up your inner knowing, what you're doing is you're strengthening your connection to this inner knowing. Because as we're moving through life, as life is happening, as we find ourselves in our different communities, as we find ourselves in our different families and connections and schools, we're fed information. We're fed information. We're fed information. Information that belongs to the communities, information that belongs to other people, information that belongs to the collective, right? We're fed this information over and over and over again. And not only are we fed this information, but we're expected to honor this information. We're expected to abide by this information that we've been fed. And oftentimes, that information is not something that helps us, that assists us in the process of charging up our inner knowing, of strengthening this connection that we have to our inner knowing. If anything, this information that we're being fed, more often than not, serves as a distraction from the inner knowing, from our inner knowing, right? And so there's this call right now for us as a collective to charge up our inner knowing, to strengthen our connection to this inner knowing, to our inner knowing, to strengthen our connection to this truth, that to this pebble of truth, I'll say, that lives within us, that has always been living within us, that we've always had access to. Okay, we've always had access to this wisdom and truth, but oftentimes it's not what we're relying on in order to create our lives. Okay, and so in order to strengthen this connection to our inner knowing, we have to start relying on the wisdom and truth that lives within us in order to help us create the lives that we want to live. Strengthening our connection to our inner wisdom is what will help to clear the path. Okay, for some of us, it may feel like that we're walking along this trail, we're walking along this path. So it could feel like you're walking along this path, you're walking along this trail, and as you're walking on the trail, you're walking on the path, there's all kinds of debris, right? There's all kinds of debris. You're having to climb over it, walk around it. And that debris represents that information that you've been fed for most of your life, that's serving as a distraction, right? So it's that information that you've been using to live your life, that you've been taking heed to this information that you've been fed over your inner knowing, over the wisdom and truth that lives within you, that you were born with, that you've always had access to it. So because you have been walking along this path, or what you're starting to experience is that as you're walking along this path, there have been some clear spots along the path, but now there's this inner calling. And this inner calling, you're becoming more and more aware of it. And because you're becoming more and more aware of it, there's more debris that's starting to fall along the path. Because this inner knowing is trying to get your attention, right? This inner knowing is trying to get your attention. So one of the things that you need to know as you're walking along this path, because oftentimes we can look at the debris and we're not necessarily seeing it as a distraction, but we can look at the debris and we tend to think to ourselves, I'm going the wrong way, or I'm lost, or I'm confused, or I don't know what I'm doing, or I failed, okay? But instead of looking at it as if you are lost and confused, simply see the debris showing up as a distraction. And see this distraction as being organized or orchestrated by your intuitive self as a way to get your attention. As a way to get your attention. This debris that's falling onto the path, don't look at it as a coincidence. Don't look at it as a coincidence. Start to see the debris that's falling onto your path, that's making it harder for you to walk in the direction that you've been walking in. Start to see it as a gift from your intuitive self. And if you can take on that perspective, this is where things will begin to clear up for you. Because if you can see, this is my intuitive voice trying to steer me in a different direction, trying to get my attention, let me pause where I'm at on the path instead of continuing to move forward. Let me pause for a second and let me listen. Oh, okay. When I listen, as I'm listening, the debris starts to clear up. I start to hear more clearly the directives from within. I start to hear my inner knowing more clearly. So now that confusion and that feeling of being lost starts to disappear. I'm not lost. I was distracted. I was distracted by the outside noise. I was distracted by the information that I've been fed my entire life. And now that I realize that I have access to this inner knowing, let me listen, because I know that it's that inner knowing. It's my inner knowing. It's this wisdom and truth. It's this intuitive voice. It's this intuitive heartbeat, this intuitive impulse that's going to show me how I can clear the debris so that I can actually begin to live in accordance with the will of my soul. So you want to begin to follow the trail, because what will happen is as that debris clears, your intuitive self will leave little clues for you. Your intuitive self will create a trail for you, will clear the path, or maybe even create a new path for you. But what you can do in order to strengthen your connection to that intuitive voice, in order for you to strengthen your connection to your inner knowing, in order for you to charge up your inner knowing, right? Just like you're plugging it into a charger that's plugged into the wall, this is how you charge up your connection to that inner knowing, is by following that intuitive impulse, those intuitive impulses, even in the seemingly small moments. Oftentimes, we're looking for our intuitive voice to be loud and big and, create this grand gesture so that we can see what it is that we need to do. But that's not how it works. Our intuitive voice is always guiding us in small, subtle ways. And if we can begin to notice the small, subtle ways in which our intuitive voice is guiding us, in which our inner knowing is trying to get our attention through those small moments, that is how you build the connection. It's not always going to be some grand gesture to get our attention. We build confidence by paying attention to those small moments. That inner voice is telling me to say no to this. That inner voice is telling me to go here. I've never been here before. I don't know why I should go there. It doesn't really make sense, but let me follow because it'll make sense when I get there. And then whenever I get there, that inner knowing will continue to guide me and lead me so that I can continue to take the steps that I need to make things make sense. We want it to make sense on the back end. It's not going to make sense on the back end. It's going to make sense down the road. And our confidence in our inner knowing strengthens, our connection to our inner knowing strengthens when we make the decision to follow the path that our inner knowing is laying, that our inner voice, that our inner selves are laying out for us. Okay, so every time you follow the intuitive impulse, you build momentum and you experience less of the perceived roadblocks. You experience less of the perceived roadblocks because oftentimes a lot of the roadblocks that we're experiencing are just things that we've created in our minds. So once we start to follow the intuitive impulse, we're creating momentum, we're building momentum, and we experience less of those roadblocks. So the less roadblocks that you create for yourself, the less roadblocks that you experience, you build momentum and you strengthen that connection to your inner knowing. So what this is all about, whenever it comes to charging up your inner knowing, whenever it comes to strengthening your connection to your inner knowing, at the end of the day, what it's all about is two words: surrender and obedience. Surrender and obedience. Surrender and obedience. What is it that you need to surrender? And can you obey that inner voice? Can you take heed to that inner voice? Can you put that inner voice first? Because oftentimes that inner voice is guiding us away from what we've always known. Oftentimes that inner voice is guiding us away from what's familiar. Oftentimes that inner voice is guiding us away from what's comfortable. And so in order to learn what it is that's on the other, that's in order for us to learn and experience what it is that's on the other side of those intuitive impulses, we have to surrender what's comfortable. We have to surrender what's familiar. And surrender becomes before obedience. Surrender leads to obedience. Surrender leads to obedience. Okay? And so strengthening your connection to your inner knowing, that is what I'm hearing is the next, that's the step that you're needing to take in order to take the step that you're needing to take. Okay? In order to take the step that you're needing to take, you need to strengthen your inner connection. because that is going to open up doors for you on a mental, emotional, energetic, spiritual, and physical level in every aspect, strengthening your connection to that inner knowing, to your intuitive voice, to the will of your soul. So, I love you so much. Do what you need to do in order to move forward. Do what you need to do in order to move forward, because you're being called into something greater. You're being called into something greater. And a lot of times we think that there's so much required for us to do in order to step into that something greater. But this right here is what you need to do. Strengthening your connection to your inner knowing. This is what you need to do in order to step into that something greater. It's not really as tangible of a process as we think it is. So if we can do the intangible, if we can do the intangible work, the subtle work, everything else will take care of itself. I love you. Let me know if you have any thoughts. Put them in the comments, and I'll see you next time.